So we're going to start off with our afternoon keynote with Geraldine Laybourne. She's the founder, chairman, and CEO of Oxygen Media, and she's going to be questioned, sort of taken to task. I don't know. We'll see what sort of a discussion they have by digital media entrepreneur CJ Kettler, who is the founder and CEO of Genius Crowds, and they are also former co-workers, I believe. So please welcome them both to the stage.
Thanks so much, Manoush. So much fun to be here. Great to see all of you. It's afternoon session is always sort of the low point, so we're going to try to pick this up and make it really a conversation between two very close girlfriends, one of whom has had a very extraordinary career. So
both of who have.
Oh, yeah, okay. So let me start a little bit, because I think what's different about chatting with Jerry this afternoon, and this is really meant to be a conversation between friends, is that we heard a lot during the day from women who have started something from scratch, women who are beginning their businesses, women who've had jobs in sort of early or mid-career have jumped off. And one of the things and one of the perspectives I think that Jerry brings us is that she's an entrepreneur who started what I would call a pretty big, hairy, audacious goal, and that is as the founder, chairman, CEO of Oxygen. I also just want to add a couple of other points about Jerry before I start. Yes, Jerry's corporate experience was Oxygen. She was president of ABC Cable Networks as well. She was vice chair at MTVNetworks and president of Nickelodeon. And those are her corporate things that she's done. Her civic things, she is trustee at her alma mater, Vassar College. She sits on the board of JCPenney and Symantec and Alloy Media. And one of my favorite things is she's also a tireless supporter of women candidates. All that said, and all of those extraordinary accomplishments kind of don't hold a candle to Jerry's impact if you're lucky enough to be her friend. And I can share that story. So my favorite Jerry anecdote, and it's very embarrassing, and thankfully my child is not here to hear it, is that Jerry and I very often will take a walk in the park just to catch up and see how life is going. And this was a while ago, 15 years ago actually now. And I had 2 kids, and I was on the fence along with my husband about whether or not to have a third child. And Jerry and I took our usual walk in the park, and I said, you know, we just don't know, that we're out of diapers, Zoe's 4, maybe we shouldn't do this. Jerry stopped dead in her tracks, looked me in the eye, and said, honey, go home and throw your legs up in the air right now.
My only real regret was that I hadn't had 3 kids, so I vicariously got a third through CJ.
It's true. So Lila is now 15, and we share her. Jerry is her godmother, as is Kit, her godfather, and she is a shared child. And when I told her I might tell that story, she's like, no, don't do that. Do you have to say it that way? Yeah. Anyway, so that's profound advice, and if you're lucky enough to have friends who can give you that kind of profound advice that really does, you know, change your life forever, I have to say I'm lucky enough to have Jerry that way. So let's start on Jerry and Oxygen, because I think folks really want to hear about that. It's a pretty big, hairy, audacious goal. Let's just talk about how did that start? Let's talk about the first thing of having come out of large companies and taking a leap as an entrepreneur. Was there a moment, that decisive moment, when you said, I'm getting off of this ship?
I need to just backtrack a tiny bit. The early days of cable was kind of the Wild West, and that's what I like about the current climate right now. There are no real rules you have to follow. And there were no rules then. So my early career at Nickelodeon was very entrepreneurial, and I had almost no oversight. In fact, I joke that they only asked me 4 questions the whole time I was there because we kept overperforming and we became so much bigger than they ever imagined. But having done Nickelodeon and done it as an entrepreneur and built it with really the way a woman would build it, I'll just say that. I built it with partnerships with cable operators. They were my buddies. They were really important to Nickelodeon and to growing the cable landscape. I took a job, I got recruited out of Nickelodeon, I went to Disney, and that was my first real corporate job in my mind. Because honestly, when I was at Nickelodeon, I thought I owned it. It took years to discover Sumner Redstone actually owned it. But my mindset was, so much into the ownership mind. When I got to Disney, I realized I was a horrible corporate executive. I had no interest in kind of clawing my way up the ladder with the other corporate executives. I was very mission-driven. With Nickelodeon, I wanted to do something great for kids. I went to Disney because I thought I could do something great for news, for women, and for education. But I wasn't a good corporate executive. I wasn't particularly polite. I wasn't particularly interested in what everybody else was doing to comply. And you asked, was there a moment when I knew I had to be an entrepreneur? I had a dream. And at the end of the dream, I woke up gasping for air. And I said, oxygen, that's what the world needs. It was really what I needed. But, it was oxygen. We need a place where creative people can own their work, where people can, because I did not do well in a corporate setting. So it was really very deep. I had to go back to being an entrepreneur.
Because you couldn't breathe in a large corporation.
I couldn't breathe in a large corporation. I didn't like the way people treated each other. I didn't like the whole thing.
And so that was really how it was conceived. It was gasping for air, and then it became oxygen, which is great. Tell us what you did first.
Well, because my credentials were all in cable, I went to the largest cable operator at the time, TCI, Leo Hendry, who is a big friend of mine, and I said, if I started a network for women, would you give me carriage? And he said yes. And that was the reason we were able to do something so big and bodacious, was because I had helped these guys who were slightly older than I was, slightly more Republican, and slightly more cable operator-y than I was. But they were my friends, and they wanted to see me succeed. So we were able to raise quite a bit of capital, but it was really based on having relationships and having had a track record.
Tell us how much capital you raised.
We raised close to $600 million.
Are there any parallels to that now, of a woman going out and raising $600 million to start what was, and everyone should know this about Oxygen, because one of Jerry's uncanny abilities is being able to sort of see the trends before they happen. So Oxygen, while it was financed as a cable network, was really meant to be the first of the cross-platform brands, where we were going interchangeably between the web and on television.
Well, the downside of that was I could see the trend. It was just much clearer to me that it was going to happen right now and not 10 or 15 years later.
You were early.
And we got into trouble. We had bankers who were telling us not to spend any of the money that we'd raised on the cable network, to spend all of it on the internet. So we had 19 websites in about 18 months' time. We're building on the internet side when people still had dial-up. When I think about the ease of how we live in this digital world today, it's like night and day. We were ahead of our time. That market crashed, and we then had bankers telling us that we should have been spending the money on TV, which fortunately we were. So we pretty much closed down the internet. But the original idea for Oxygen, and I still I send this out into the room for those of you who are working on things that really look to me like they would be tremendously helpful for women, is the following. Oxygen was actually supposed to be more like a utility. Oxygen was taking this stand that women think differently than men, and women have many more jobs than men. Women are the chief purchasing agents of their home. They are the chief financial officer. They're the chief human resources, psychology, school nurse, they're everything. And would there be a way in this digital world to make that, all those different jobs more integrated and to have them connected more seamlessly and more fun? And with an interface that wasn't about putting things in folders. Because honestly, I don't know how many engineers there are in the room, but women do not think like engineers. And I pray that some of you will go into devising things that make women's lives better, because we do so many different jobs. And that was what I had hoped for Oxygen, and we did not achieve that.
Well, let's talk about that, because I think that's also a great story and lesson learned. So you conceive of this big idea for women. You see it as a utility. You have investors who may have the same or different views of the company and the business you're building. And you build it and you exit to NBC. And what it is today versus what you conceived, there have to be a lot of feelings along that road.
Well, the good thing about women is that we tend to remember the good things, and otherwise you wouldn't have 3 children.
Exactly.
But I'm not done. So I figure I get a bunch of do-overs. But the truth about Oxygen is we sold it for close to $1 billion, so all the investors did okay. The only ones who didn't do great were my employees, to which I will always regret. But we had, different investors who had different time frames, and most of our investors were in it because of the high-speed tech interactive world, and they expected a big return in a short amount of time. They didn't expect a value return. That's what they got. They didn't get a home run. And Oxygen does very well for NBC and will be a brand that represents a kind of a loud voice for young women. And I think that's a good thing. I don't think it was as fully cooked as Nickelodeon when I left it. So, would I have liked to do a little more cooking? You bet. But, the reason I sit on technology corporate boards is because I want them to pay attention to women. If I was running a tech company today, I would not ever do a focus group with men, because women are making 74% of all the decisions about technology. So it's not just a little idea. It's, and by the way, I think Steve Jobs understood that.
Yeah.
I think the way he designed was very much in the intuitive way that women think and like to operate, and and it had great benefits to their company. So if I was running a big tech company, I would pay a lot of attention to women.
So let's talk about that in terms of startups. So many of the women in the audience are creating companies that have products and or services targeting women. What should they be doing to make sure that they've got the female voice and POV in their product and service?
Well, I'll just take you back to, I promise I'm answering that question.
Okay, I know you'll get there.
So we got profitable as a television network, and the year we got profitable as a television network, my partner said, okay, as your Christmas bonus, you can do a tech project. So I got a tech team that was agile management. Anybody here practice agile management? Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody who's running anything should learn about agile management, because it is a sensational way of managing a project. So the guys in my tech team welcomed me in and let me be the project manager, even though I knew nothing about coding or design. And we worked for a year, and we developed something that unfortunately never got properly launched. It got purchased by NBC, but it was called Ripped.com, which really was the precursor to Pinterest. And it was a fabulous piece of software that thought the way women think. We have so many visual decisions that we have to make. So this was a platform that allowed you to rip images from websites, flash images, any kind of image, images from your hard drive. You could send your husband a floor plan for your living room with all these different things, so you could design it and purchase it, and it was really pretty nifty. But during the whole process, the tech guys got a kick out of me because, and they did hire 2 women, which was fantastic, but I didn't want anything to look like anything else. I didn't want to have an icon for a printer. I didn't want to have what everybody else was having. I wanted it to be fresh and to be intuitive and to be something that would be so easy and intuitive. And so my advice to you is to do precisely that, is not to let the engineers tell you that it has to be such and such. Engineers and coders are fantastic, and they're fantastic at solving the problem, but don't believe that until we get enough women, and there's somebody here from Girls Who Code. Are you still here?
There probably are a few folks from...
Fantastic organization. It's going to be a while before we get enough women designing stuff, but I really urge you to be honest about, is that appealing to me? Do I need to see another trash can or another printer? No. You know, what is another way to symbolize it and to really represent your constituents?
So being intuitive and focusing on UX and making sure that it serves the audience is paramount, with coding that serves that as the leader.
Being an advocate for your consumer, and because you are your consumer, you have such a huge advantage.
Yeah.
When I first told the guys at Oxygen that women thought differently, they really thought I was crazy. And they went home and they spent 3 days watching their mothers, their sisters, their girlfriends, their wives, and they came back and said, "You're right. We have 12% more prefrontal cortex. We never shut down a topic.
Right.
We're always going from one thing to another."
We're multitaskers. We know that. It's a good thing. Let's talk a little bit about the media landscape. So Oxygen started. We were way ahead of our time at Oxygen from a cross-platform perspective, but now we live in a world of total fragmentation. Over-the-top distribution has taken over from the broadcast model. We view content on multiple devices. We have multiple distribution points. Where do you see that landscape now? And what are really the overarching trends in media, both from a content perspective and from a distribution perspective?
You know, I worry a lot about content. And the funny thing is, with all this over-the-top talk, the best, in my view, television has never been better. And that's largely thanks to HBO and Showtime. But how many people here feel like television is better this season than 2 seasons ago? Yeah. But we're in a dangerous situation. Young people are growing up, they aren't subscribing to cable, but there is a very good economic system that pays for content through the cable infrastructure. And if that gets eroded terribly, it's a tough situation, because how many people have a $120 cable bill every month or higher? You know, that is very high.
And how many are cord cutters, just out of curiosity? Okay.
So the next generation down from you are not going to ever have the cord connected. And that is worrisome if you want to have good content in the pipeline. And you can have all the over-the-top content that you want, but if it's not, doesn't have production values, the chances of it really being great are slim. It's the odd thing that's over the top that creates an audience, and you know, you need the food chain. So somehow I worry about that with this young generation.
Right, because the train has left the station. The
Right.
cord cutters, the next generation down, kids don't even want to own a television, let alone pay for cable. So it presumes that the quality of our content has to go down because the subscription numbers will go down and they won't be able to afford to make Homeland and some of the better shows.
Well, I hope I die before that happens, because I think it would be a terrible loss. And right now, the economics, the only way to have a high production value series that's over the top without any network launch is by having branded content. And that's not such a panacea either, because then you have advertisers who want to have messages put in the middle of embedded in the show, so it doesn't result in the best thing. So the one thing I'll say about the world of entertainment is even in my lifetime, I think I got TV when I was 3 years old. So for 3 years, I lived in a radio world. And, you know, we've seen things come and things get added. We have rarely seen things subtracted. But I don't know. I don't know how reality television is going to keep on going. And even though that's a large part of Oxygen now, I just don't know how that model exists over time. It can't be repeated. It's got, you know, a limited short life. So I don't know about that. But if I were anybody in this room thinking about how to spend their time, I wouldn't be spending it on trying to figure out how to produce content. I would be figuring out how to serve the audience. And if you are going to produce content, I think you have to still do it in the conventional way, because otherwise you're working on stuff that's not that interesting.
And you're working on budgets that are so thin that it's really hard to build an audience and get any traction. Let's talk a little bit about media as a tool. So many entrepreneurs talked all day today about PR and the value of press, whether or not press can actually drive traffic or does press provide credibility. You are a brand in media and entertainment, and tell us a little bit about how media played a role as you built your career.
Well, at Nickelodeon, it was very hard to get any attention from the press. But I still sought it because we were trying to do some very brave things at Nickelodeon. And we were looking at children's programming in a completely different way. We were trying to turn conventional wisdom on its head. And I found that if I talked about what we were doing in the press, that my company would be more supportive. And that may sound like a really, crazy thing to do, but the truth is, if you're creating something new, whether you're inside a company or you're outside on your own, you're constantly trying to sell your vision and get people behind your vision. And the best way to do that is through the press. And, you get an interested reporter and they will really help you crystallize your vision.
There's one of my favorite things in the book, The Art of the Start. Guy Kawasaki says, never say no to any journalist. And I think that's interesting because you think that you're chatting with a journalist in order to tell your story, but in some ways, what Jerry is saying is you're telling your story to make sure you follow your vision and you set your agenda, and then you have to deliver on it because you've put it out there. And whether you're in a large company or a small company, using the media as a tool to begin to say who you are and what you want to accomplish is a very valid way of building a business.
Now, the flip side of that is when we started Oxygen, we did not ever seek any press.
Yeah.
And they sought us because we had Oprah Winfrey as one of our partners. And we had a cover story. That is the one piece that we did really cooperate with, was the Forbes cover story. And that was because we were in fundraising. And it really helped us in our fundraising to have a picture of me and Oprah and Marcy on the cover of Forbes. But it also set us up because the media loves to build you up. Can you guess why? They love to tear you down.
Exactly.
And they had a field day with us. And so it wasn't so much fun being in the microscope of all of that. But in general, I think it helps your coworkers to feel like you're real. It helps you to feel like you're real. And I think, CJ, the way you said it is exactly right. It helps you to stay honest to your vision.
Stay on point. You got to deliver what you told the world you were going to do. So now let's sort of look back, especially I sort of want to come to our last question of looking at the landscape, just in terms of the way businesses used to be built versus how they're built now, the fact that there is this movement towards lean startups, the fact that there is social media and that each one of us is a publisher in our own right now. What does that mean for women in general in terms of the climate? And I also want to think about that just not only in terms of business, but because you're so involved with supporting women candidates. You tell us a little bit about the landscape for women after last week's election.
Well, I think it's a really great time for women. And the fact that we're now 20% of the U.S. Senate, that is a phenomenal accomplishment.
Yeah.
And not only that, but these women are amazing. Heidi Heitkamp from North Dakota is awesome. Maisie Hirona from Hawaii, Elizabeth Warren, Kirsten Gillibrand. These women are really fantastic, and they will make a difference to our country. I think, though, when you get to a tipping point we'd like to be at the 30% tipping point, but even 20% is a tipping point. And I feel like seeing that percentage of women in the Senate will say to people like all of you, hey, maybe I should run. Maybe I could win. And I believe in the combination of men and women. Some of my best friends are men. And I think they're fantastic. But men and women think differently, and we are a great combination, and we keep each other honest. And until we get change in Washington that reflects the population, you won't see it in companies. And, we've had such a hard time getting beyond 17% of anything. It's, 17% of board seats, 17% of this. We've got to get to the tipping point on boards. I spent a lot of time trying to get women on boards. I spent a lot of time trying to get women in politics. I spent a lot of time trying to get women into technology companies. And, everybody knows how good we are. Every management study, every piece of research we have on how do women do, either in their own companies or in the workforce, we perform better on every criteria except for two.
Which are?
Tooting our own horn.
Right.
We tend to, try to downplay what we've done. So my saying to women is, if you can't toot your own horn, toot another woman's horn. And that is a really good thing to do, because if we toot for each other, we will be tooted for as well.
Well, I think that is worth talking about that, because even in the election, what I saw happening with the candidates, Kirsten Gillibrand is one, who sent out emails and said, help me support other women who are running for office. That's never something I've ever seen any male candidate ever do and ever will do. But it speaks to the network effect of how women come to the table in a collaborative, more socially conscious, virally social way that we can help each other and toot each other's horns if you can't do it for yourself.
Yep.
So,
And the other is we don't take risks fast enough. So we don't trust our own intuition, which is crazy because how many in here have really good intuition? Okay. But we still feel like we have to have our decks all organized and, and orderly and looking nice, and we need to step forward faster, and we need to raise our hands when there's an opportunity, and we need to say yes.
there you go.